Welcome to the Biota Podcast. I think probably still should be called the Biota Podcast, even though it's a different thing now and there's a wide variety. Maybe one day in the near future I'll have an opportunity to talk to Bruce Damer, but I have on the one and only Dr. Imy Khan. Pleasure as always, Imy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I just saw our previous call. I think we last spoke on the 13th of August last year, so it's been a little while.
Far too long. Yes, I've been through various life changes, and you're technically, physically, I understand, in the UK, in a very nice part of the UK. Actually, we had an opportunity just to have a brief chat, but you're still in some kind of AI state in Sweden. So what's the past few months been like for you?
So the past few months, so I mean, I'm technically working still for the University of Gothenburg. So, emotionally, I'm still in Sweden. Cognitively, I'm still in Sweden. Physically, I'm in the UK. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I can talk quite candidly about this. There was just an accommodation issue with the university, and Gothenburg is notoriously difficult to find good accommodation or any accommodation. So I'm back here. I'm in the UK. I'm still working for a Swedish company, which, as I've now realized, because it's now time for tax returns, have now realized that this is causing all sorts of difficult and complicated tax and insurance and social insurance issues, which I'm trying to get through.
Always fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange. It's I was just talking to one of the tax agency. I won't bore you too much, but talking to the tax agency very quickly about where my tax liability was, and really bizarrely, because I got married while I was out in Sweden, so in the year and a half I was out there, I actually got married, my tax liability now changed. So now that I'm back in the UK, I now have to file tax returns back in the UK, and it's I've never done it before, and it's going to be pretty interesting, but I'm going to try and do it on company time as much as possible, because
it is a very interesting process. My memory, I lived in the UK for about 4 years. And taxes in the UK, taxes everywhere are just unique beasts. I think because it involves lawyers and accountants and government and a wide variety of things that you don't really want involved with any part of this process, it means that there are just so many bizarre laws that you need to kind of discover. I hasten to add, having children is a very similar process, because you realize that there are bizarre laws. I mean, nominally, I hold statehood both in the UK and Australia, but my children can't hold statehood in either place, which is really very bizarre. The whole notion of birthrights, which I used to think were a thing, were written out of the UK law in 1980. So the whole nature of having children overseas and not getting them having the same rights, it's all very curious. And tax is just a subset of that, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's really strange. For me, I still technically have residency in Sweden, so I have a residence permit. I'm not officially a citizen yet. I think the citizenship is a little bit more complicated, but
certainly.
Yeah, that goes on for another couple of years, and it goes up to the end of this year, which again is something that I'm going to have to navigate if I decide to extend the work that I'm doing in Sweden. And I mean, just to get a little bit political, certainly not helped by Britain's decision to exit the EU, so this is compounded the problem somewhat.
But having come from the Northwest, you probably remember, I don't know if you go back to the Northwest, but I used to find frequent travel to that part of the world reminds you very quickly of why, just in terms of poverty alone, the EU has not been felt in all parts of the UK, and ultimately I think that is the rising undercurrent that that particular political ballot showed. Anyway, we shouldn't get political. This podcast is going to get very political, actually. You've raised a number of topics which get political, so I think we're just going to have to leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, anyway, for me, obviously I've been in some kind of existential crisis with regards to my career. It's interesting, actually, the differences between doing academic stuff and doing stuff in industry. And I had a recent chat with Larry Yeager, who actually features in one of the points that you wanted to raise as well. And it's interesting, Larry Yeager is now retired. So the fact that no one is maintaining Polyworld is actually not necessarily a bad thing for him. I constantly am in this, what happens when I'm no longer developing my artificial life projects? Will there still be maintainers? Will there still be people interested in this? Is it just something that's set in a time that won't exist after, I ideally, I guess, move into retirement. So Larry is being incredibly philosophical. I think, obviously, if you've had the impact on industry and academia that Larry Yeager has had, maybe you can actually enjoy your retirement. Do you ever think about that, associated with what happens when you retire with regards to your work and this kind of stuff?
We're opening with a grand question, right? I haven't. The reason for that is I think in many ways I feel like I'm still, at the start of my sort of academic journey or my research career. I'm not. I mean, I'm turning 35 this year, and I've had some experience in industry over the last decade and a half. But having come out of my PhD, having started done a couple of postdocs now, my head is very much at how do we begin this journey rather than what happens at the end of it. But it's a really interesting question, and maybe I need to think about it a little bit more. I mean, I do get I don't know what the word is. It's not necessarily sort of having it's not a midlife crisis necessarily, but I do feel somewhat detached from my identity, I think, as a researcher, as an academic, maybe not as a scientist, because I think that's something that's sort of inherent to an individual. Like, it's something that, you're an inquisitive or a curious individual from the get-go, and that's always going to live with you. But certainly as a career, I don't know. If I get to retirement and I just get to sell ice cream for the remainder of my years, I'll be quite happy.
Very good. Very good. So, firstly, I wanted to give some apologies, particularly to Kyle Harrington. Kyle was going to be on the podcast, when this thing kind of started dissolving around September of last year. And Kyle, I see periodically looking at my LinkedIn to get a sense of, is Tom in a state where he's going to be recording the podcast? Is Tom in a state where he's going to be? And Kyle actually has some really interesting stuff to talk about. Similarly, our mutual friend Tim Taylor, I promised long ago to do a catch-up with him. I don't even know, speaking of where in the world of people, I don't even know where Tim Taylor is currently. Is he in Edinburgh? Is he in Australia? Where is he physically?
A very, very good question. I've had a few sort of interactions with Tim via email, but normally with a few other people. I've not actually had an opportunity to speak with him personally. I don't think I've met him. I don't think he was at the last day live either.
Interesting. No, that's one of my good memories. Is actually both Kyle Harrington and Tim Taylor I met at the 1A Life conference I attended. I think we both with regards to Kyle and with Tim, we both got a sense that we were the right kind of people, which is really important when you do life work, because the opportunity to meet people like, I don't know about this character. Well, maybe Tim felt that. But he's certainly someone who I've met and I've had a chance to chat with, and obviously the Australia connection and the UK connection is there. But I'm really looking forward to catching up with Tim.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've had a few interactions. It'd be if Tim's listening to this episode and, you happen to be at the next conference, Tim, please come say hello. But I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for us to physically interact at some point. But yeah, I mean, the conference, speaking of which, the conference is going to be in Copenhagen this year.
Ooh, interesting.
In 2 or 3 months, yeah.
Gosh.
So there's been a few things. I mean, this week actually, we've been doing reviews and meta reviews and so on and so forth for the conference. So it'd be nice. I always, I think we spoke not long after I came back from. Yeah, and I've just an eagerness to get back and get talking to that community as well. But I mean, I don't want to diverge from our main topics too much, but it's interesting you're talking about having the right kind of people.
Yes.
Or at least I'm looking now at, I can't spoil too much and I can't disclose too much, but at least just looking at year on year the type of papers that come into the conference and the review process, and what you're seeing now is more of a, for better or for worse, divergence away from like what I guess you would consider to be like the core A-Life ideas. Time will tell whether that's a good thing. I think A-Life probably lends itself well to exploring divergence of ideas and methods and so on. But one small fear that I probably have, and maybe others have as well, and maybe this is unfounded, but the risk that A-Life is just sort of seen as sort of this proxy to submit artificial intelligence stuff to.
Certainly.
Which is cropping up a little bit.
Well, it's always been. I mean, it's interesting because certainly it's on my list of topics as well. But just where it fits into the broader ecosystem, particularly with industry. I'm going to talk about TensorFlow, in this discussion a bit later on. But the way in which there's so much money and so much interest and so much energy in a particular thing which doesn't quite actually align with historical A life. I actually say when I meet people in that world that you need to understand historical A life to understand, OpenAI. It's a theme that I've had through these podcasts for the past year. But I really strongly believe that the nuances and the history, and just look at Larry Yeager's work as an example and how that, moved into what is now OpenAI, you need to understand the nuances. And I think even amongst academia, what I'm finding is that there are these new kind of industry academics that are basically just teaching people to go into particular parts of industry. And while they appreciate this thing as like a beautiful bauble that, we dust off and maintain, the practicalities of what is now needed in industry and I saw that actually with the A-Life conferences because I was on a paper review, I don't know, maybe 4 conferences ago. And when the industry papers started coming in, I was like, oh, this is great. This is really interesting. And this also lends itself to some of Tim Taylor's work as well. That this is the right, this is not the right direction, but this is direction where we can really move the field forward. But there's always been this historical, we want Blocky Walkers kind of folk. And then you see where the world is currently. Am I distilling down basically what you're trying to say as well, Imy?
Yeah. And I think this is the unfortunate sort of, it's almost like a mantra, I think, in artificial life fields, is that like, it's a hard, like really the core basic research that I think a lot of the A-lifers are interested in. It's a hard sell to people who are actually trying to give you money to do research because they want to see tangible, like you said, they need industry, want to see tangible outputs or applications from the work that's being done. And, there is beauty, of course, there is this beauty in really diving into like the core philosophical questions, like the origins of life stuff, of course, like, just doing research for its own sake and asking really interesting, being curious in those questions.
Yes.
But fundamentally, as we've got in one of the topics here, like, that has to have some type of real tangible impact. Firstly, I mean, on the funders, right, on the people that have given you the money. And if that is industry, then there has to be something that is going to give them an advantage, some benefits, some tools, some product. Or if it is the taxpayers, the society, then that needs to be the citizens. And translating sort of like the basic core research that we're trying to do in artificial life sometimes to those stakeholders, I think becomes very, very difficult.
Definitely. Well, you have... Oh, I was going to say, apologies also to Gerald de Jong. I have been in correspondence with Gerald de Jong, so I do feel like he and I have at least exchanged text messages. Supermarkets, he tended to text me when I was at supermarkets, which is a very strange place to text me and have a detailed argument about some mathematical... Never an argument, actually. I should make that clear. Gerald has a very particular means of texting, which I've actually apologized to him on a few occasions where I thought he was actually being considerably more pointed than he actually was. He was actually just looking for information associated with certain, bits of mathematics. So Gerald and I need to have a jamming session on one of these podcast recordings just to see. Gerald and I have known each other. I met Gerald, actually. He came when I was at my previous corporate gig, so to speak. He actually came and we spent a lunchtime together. We went on a walk in the local, wildlife sanctuary and did various other things. It was the time where the Supreme Court had just okayed gay marriage. So it was like the world is spinning on its axis associated with like mixed metaphors. And, obviously the next day they were allowing, corporate drilling in wildlife parks and things like that with guns and various other things. But yeah, it was a very interesting day to have a conversation, to walk with Gerald de Jong and to get a sense of his son in particular, who is now doing Rust related stuff, and always good to check in with Gerald associated with his children and their ongoing work too. So Gerald, you will definitely be coming back on the podcast. We've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. If nothing more, he now makes tensegrity geometries, literally artistic things that they send screws and various things to all kinds of people to build these tensegrity. Are you familiar with tensegrities?
I'm not.
Okay, so Buckminster Fuller looking just at basically that you can use force vectors in physics to create these amazing shapes which look like they're impossible, but actually are just based on the force vectors of physics. Anyway, one of his largest groups that he sends these things to are homeopathic massage houses in the US that want to have these things. So an amazing distillation by interactions with Gerald Jung down into these tensegrity things that he sells. It's a business for him. And taking A life and making it into physical models that you can send people and have them put in their massage facilities, I just thought was a very interesting vignette into Gerald's life. But it'd be great to have him on. The topic that you have on the top of your list, which is A life and society, what are the social duties implications of A life plus researchers as the two things are different things?
Well, yeah, I think, thank you for raising this topic, because I think it's something that I think about. I also talk about it quite a lot, and I might just go off and, not a rant necessarily, but I might just...
Go for it. That's what this podcast is about.
Solid and just, yeah, so I think the first thing is about researchers, right? And when we talk about our impact as researchers, there is this thing that's coming up, and it seems to be a buzzword right now about societal impact. And this is, we see it on all the grant applications, big EU Horizon grants, national grants. They all have a section for this about, what is the societal impact of your research. And I think that's a really great starting point. And actually, I think what we need to think about firstly is researchers in general, and I'll sort of come back to the A-Life bit in a second, is... and feel free to jump in here as well if you agree or disagree. But I think what I'm starting to think about more and more as I'm sort of developing and maturing as a researcher is the societal impact that we have needs to be the critical, or one of the critical measures for how we measure our success. There's some things like dissemination amongst the public, rather than just in conferences and in science circles, which I can also have a little discussion about, rather than just like these publications. So I'm not going to talk about this sort of publish or perish model, which I think is not working for many people anyway.
It's completely outdated. A beautiful model at the time, but we've moved beyond that in some regard.
Yeah, and I think this is I think the entire dissemination model in general is broken. This is I'm not just talking about the publications, but I'm even talking here about conferences. I think I can be quite critical about conferences as well.
Well, that's why we're doing a podcast fundamentally, right? That's the whole idea, that we're going to do a podcast because it what's already completely short-circuited with regards to books, academic publications. A podcast just cuts all that down and enables you to get information out in a very curious fashion. But anyway, I'll let you continue. No,
I completely agree with this, and this is where I think. I have been brainstorming a bunch of these ideas, and I need to write down them in more coherent form at some point. But yeah, the general idea, like, dissemination is broken. I think actually, if we're thinking like in purely A-Life terms, like as a field as well, and like as scientists, the entire field and the way we do things needs to like be a little bit adaptive and a little bit flexible. I think
You'd hope so.
Yeah, but I see. So I engage a lot with, for instance, like exercise science and sports science literature as well, and I think that domain is a really good example of how they are disseminating to the public, because what they're doing is not leveraging. Many of them leverage podcasts, and it's really, really good. Obviously, they have conference and journal publications, but actually, the way they disseminate to the public is through Instagram and TikTok.
Yes, amazing.
And what we have now, unfortunately, is like this generational divide of where we're still using the old models, and I will call them old models that maybe worked in generations past, where we have publications and we have conferences and people are traveling and so on and so forth. And now you have sort of millennials and like Gen Zers who are coming up, and they are. Those models are completely alien to them. They have moved way beyond that, and they are able to disseminate and communicate amongst each other so much quicker, and they're doing it so much better than previous generations. And I think what we can all do is perhaps lean into that a little bit. And I won't go into this too much because I do have like a separate thought process about like how I also think like PhD training should incorporate a lot of that, like how it should incorporate the skills required to disseminate effectively, not just at conferences and not just in publications, but actually to citizens and to the public as well. I think this is a critical point. But yeah, anyway, so this all ties into, like I said earlier, where we have a lot of our research, especially if we are at universities and we are applying for funding from, say the European Union, something. A lot of this research is funded by our tax dollars or our pounds or our euros or whatever. And
well, yours at least.
Yeah. So we have, so there is this. I almost feel like a responsibility, right, to not just to hide away in our labs or behind our computers and do research and talk to other scientists, but we need to really think about what our roles might be and what influence we might and probably should have on society as we try to make things moving forward a little bit. And I think, being a scientist and pursuing research interests, this is obviously really nice. But the perspective, at least, that I'm starting to have and starting to recognize a little bit more is that we should find ways to directly serve our community. And I think this matters more, especially if you're at university or, in academia. These places are centers of excellence and knowledge. This is what they've
they'd like to claim to be, at least.
Yeah, and we and so that should really be the heart of fostering and enacting social and political change, right? And you can
if I may here, because sure. I think certainly my perspective with regards to this, and actually a majority of my academic writing relates to this, is that any discussion with regards to a life needs to have a discussion with regards to life as well. And in particular, I was thinking about this because Larry Yeager and I actually it's in the Biota podcast feed, you can actually find this audio, but Larry Yeager and I gave a talk at my former employer, and we got to the point of, like, do we represent these things as actually being alive? And I've always taken the philosophical point that yes, you represent them as actually being alive because it actually enables you to have a very detailed conversation about what life actually means in contemporary society, with the value or lack thereof that is thrust politically frequently associated with human life. And it really is a means of turning on its head the, what would be considered, I guess, general social norms, although increasingly they're less of a thing. And it's interesting, actually, because the point of the conversation, Larry and I actually exchanged glances. And Larry looked at me like, this is dangerous territory. We can't be talking about this stuff, Tom. We can't be moving it into, deep philosophical latent stuff that has historically not been part of historical lay life. And my view is, I'm trying to think of non-French terms to use here, but my view is that this is exactly what you've got to do. You've got to utilize anything in your arsenal, so to speak, to make these points perfectly clear when you're given the opportunity to talk about them. I think A-Life has always been, for me, revolutionary. And I think that's what's really interesting to me is politically, you've seen the field go into quite a conservative academic rut, for want of a better term. And actually, I think it's important for our duty as people that create these things is to say, actually, there are deeper philosophical implications about these things. You need to reflect upon them. You need to start challenging what the definition of life is in a society where clearly it has just the level of homelessness that I see myself surrounded by. You get a clear sense that there's a certain large percentage of the population which has just been completely discarded in this country. And that, in and of itself, I feel when I write my ape simulations and cultivate my monkeys and look at, neural network models and various other things, that all resounds with the fact that I'm still a human existing in a society, making choices to do these amazingly kind of bespoke, elaborate things, when in contrast, a majority of my, cohabitants don't get to have this kind of fun. Their fun is, drinking in bars and various things that make fun out of, contemporary living. And I think that's always an important thing. I actually like getting very deep with regards to this philosophy, society, what's A-Life's responsibility in that, because I feel very strongly, and it could just be part of my general social upbringing, that what we do is more than a luxury. It's actually quite elaborate and very much removed from general society. But it's incredibly important that we do this work, and that's what I find interesting is I frequently meet people who are just like right on, they've used my simulation software at some stage, or they've heard about it on, NPR or one of these podcasts or a YouTube video, or literally academics talk about my work still with regards to, exploring potentials of certain things. And my view is that exists organically out in a society which creates people that are just like right on. Like, you've been doing this now for 28 years. Right on, So I think there are many different layers to this onion. But I would certainly say that I see it very much in revolutionary terms and in ways of making really stark contrasts with regards to the social judgments and various other things that contemporary society is actively making on our behalves without actually engaging with our tax dollars beautifully. So I think it's very important to be political with this thing, and it's very important to actually utilize as much as possible a keen distinction between, what we see externally, or even within the field of A life itself, what we see academically in the field of A life, and where we want this thing to be. Anyway, I interrupted you. No,
that was an excellent interruption, so thank you very much for sharing that. But I think this is exactly, I think any sort of change, if we're thinking about impacts, most of these things will fall under either social or political change. And the idea of I think you mentioned this example, but when we are talking about, say, the origins of life, for instance, yes, that has excellent applications into our search for astrobiological life, certainly, but more importantly, that helps probably answer really fundamental questions as to those really difficult political questions and ethical questions, and like when life emerges in utero, for instance, in a human, and then that has massive political implications and social implications. So I think I've not at least heard those discussions in A life right now. When we're talking about oranges,
but they should be there, right?
No, absolutely. But this is why I think it's really easy when you're a scientist or when you're a researcher, whatever you want to call yourself, to get your project going for 3 or 5 years, however it is, and just dive into the model and the results, and really not almost be disconnected from the realities of what real results could have on the implications of those results. But it goes both ways, I think. I think on the one hand, if you find yourself, you have that duty to really understand what impact your results could have. That might, like you said, it might help you, just think about it a little bit deeply as you're doing it. But secondly, if you can understand that, then it might help you market yourself a little bit better in the future as well, and not.
Well, you'd hope so, but
but
experiences may vary.
But this is what happens right now, right? It's like we do a bunch of research and we just throw it into the ether and hope that somebody else is going to pick it up. And unfortunately, the people that are picking it up are only ever going to be other A-lifers or other people who are really into these niche fields.
I don't necessarily think that's the case. I mean, certainly my example indicates, and literally I've met people in a variety. I mean, it's the nature of doing open source and being on open source podcasts. And, there's a popular consciousness that still has A-life there. It's a very different thing than it was even a decade ago. It was interesting. I went back and listened to our discussion about Japan. There's so much fascinating A-life stuff in Japan, which is just so unique to their own particular perspective with regards to automata and these kind of things. So every society has its own view of what A-life is. Academic A-life is so far removed from that thing that I still think there are strong social implications if you can, in some way, perhaps as an academic community, reach to where these things are currently and look at ways of actually discussing. I mean, we kind of skirting around the ML part of this thing, but obviously that's a critical part currently. If contemporary A-life doesn't have not a good story, but a good way of actually describing its, I would say, responsibility for a lot of the very curious ethical stuff that comes out of ML currently, then, that's another discussion which I don't know if academic A-life is ready for.
I don't think, I think it's a really good point, actually. I don't think they are ready for it. And I don't know what the answer necessarily is, but it's just one of those things that I am thinking about. But then again, I guess on the other hand, I speak from this as someone who is currently working in, I don't know, you could call it human-robot interactions, you could call it digital therapeutics, you could call it experimental psychology, or sort of the intersection of that. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about this, it's very easy for me to to understand the impact of my project, because I am talking about robots and I'm talking about cognitive therapies and elderly people with dementia. And, it's very tangible who my stakeholders are and what the application is, and what the end goal is. But I understand, as we've been discussing, for A-lifers, it is, especially A-lifers who work in the theoretical space, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And you mentioned an example. I had a conversation with Manuel Baltieri a couple of months ago, who works on theories of agency. And it was this disconnect, right, where we have, for him, he's really understanding or really interested in understanding, the foundations of what it is that makes an agent. How do we define an agent within, sort of boundaries and mathematically speaking, how could we define an agent? These kind of questions.
Yes.
But
it's interesting. I mean, there's a sociology of agency as well. I'm not sure if you've dug into that, but basically within society currently, we're constantly represented by agents that nominally are humans that nominally represent our interests in very curious ways. So agency has moved into its own. I mean, the sociology of agency I just find fascinating because I discovered it happenstancely, and then we're like, there's actually all this depth associated with why, I can't have a doctor in this country that actually represents my interests because of this theory of agency. So it's an area that's grown probably well outside the A-life field relatively rapidly as it's been picked up by sociologists and others too.
Yeah. And so we have, people who are interested in those sort of core questions. And then you have people in the human-robot interaction industry where if we're trying to develop a robot that is going to, deliver some sort of cognitive intervention or cognitive therapy, well, we're not interested in agency necessarily. We're just interested in the illusion of agency. As long as it appears to have its own agency and appears to be autonomous, then for all intents and purposes, the application is done. And so, it becomes very difficult for me then it becomes very difficult for A-lifers, I guess, to try and understand where their role in answering some of those basic questions is when it comes to then the application, the translation of their work to society and to, I guess, industry. I don't know. These are just sort of the things that we think about a little bit. We have the A-Life and Society group, I guess, is something that we can speak about as well. And this is where we have, it's a special interest group that I'm involved in and sort of help coordinate. And we have a special session at the conference. I think we're in our 8th year now of running this special session. But this is, some of the things that we try to do in that special session is start having these conversations around how we can use not just A-Life research necessarily, but, the methods that we have, the perspectives, our expertise, and then, to be able to find ways to engage with those real tangible societal, planetary, environmental, ecological challenges, and even some of those wicked problems and some of those, the UN Sustainable Development Goal stuff as well. For me, what that has allowed us to do, and we're still not quite there yet, but we're still sort of like nurturing this space. But we do want to, create this forum and this area where people like me and people like you probably and anybody else, where we can find ways to start recognizing the power that we have as A-lifers and start moving, not away from the theoretical necessarily, but moving certainly more towards the applied space, because I think we do have a lot to offer in that space.
Yes. I'm making a personal note that we need to talk about dementia and A-life at some stage, because I think that's absolutely a fascinating field of which I think A-life, there's so much interrelationship between the contemporary studies of dementia and understanding A-life as well. And I think that's a topic, like the religion topic, which we'll probably one day get to, that is worthy of future discussion. I see I'm kind of running down our list because time is running out for us in general. The cost of simulating an ecosystem is an ecosystem. This is a beautiful, speaking of my long-standing friendship with Gerald de Jong, this was always Gerald de Jong's frustration, is when Apple and Intel started using my simulation work to test their processors, they were basically just cooking them. And, the whole nature that really what we're developing here, it's something I think about quite a bit, looking at my simulation models, particularly run on contemporary computers and looking at things like TensorFlow, is just how am I using this ecology in order to make this beautiful bauble? But in the process of doing that, I'm using a huge amount of energy. I'm using, processor power. I'm using all these things which are ultimately attacking an ecosystem fundamentally as well. What be your thoughts here?
Many. I mean, so this ties in back to exactly what we've just been speaking about air life and air lifers having or recognizing their duty, their responsibility to other humans, to the environment, to the planet that we live on. And, without sounding like too much of a hippie, I think that needs to be a fundamental, crucial point. But I think I started to recognize this problem and I started to get a little bit more not frustrated necessarily, but more cognizant of this fact as I moved into this postdoc with the robots and working a lot with machine learning and deep learning models. So, there is a lot of chatter in the AI space right now about, the energy cost and the environmental impact of, both training and so building and then training and then running deep learning models.
Certainly.
I have a quick figure here that said data centers worldwide accounted for 1.5% of global electricity consumption.
Yes.
Which was up about 50% versus the previous year. And GPT
data centers are really, not to trivialize it, but data centers house so much technology now. I mean, with regards to streaming services, with regards to the whole notion of what a data center is and what we do with regards to simulation are very, distinct things. I think just if you look at global streaming and the energy impact of that, it's very difficult to then ethically say it's our responsibility as, I would say A-Life developers run A-Life researchers, but our responsibility associated with that, just thinking about how computation is utilized, I don't want to, bring the topic down, but there's a wide variety of digital use currently that has nothing to do with the highfalutin stuff that we would be talking about, respectfully. Yep. But it's something where I think just a knowledge of that should inform a wide variety of things about the way we, conduct ourselves. And yeah, anyway, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I think this is a really valid point. I think I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that the AI and air lifers and everything that we do computationally is accounting for all the increase in computational cost or the carbon footprint. I don't think that's the case. Like I said, I think there is just a global increase in the amount of compute that we're using anyway. But I think there are certainly some big hitters, and the fact that it is trending upwards year on year is some sort of a problem. And I guess just being cognizant of that fact. So I think, working with these deep learning models, probably you agree, the point that you just made as well. I saw that there was a really sort of frivolous and trivial approach to simply just buying the latest GPU and then building and training and retraining a bunch of deep learning models with little accountability, right? So I've got a laptop on my desk. It's turned off right now, but it's got an NVIDIA RTX 4080 in it, which is I think the second best GPU on the market right now. I think it was,
but already dates itself with this podcast, so no. Back in the day.
But the fact that it's got a battery life of 50 minutes probably tells you the extent to which the computational power that this uses. But so going back to what I said about the air life and society stuff, it feels a little bit silly that I see myself as involved in air life and society in one hand, trying to solve and answer these societal problems and various nature restoration projects that I've worked on previously, and people are working on COVID-19 modeling and so on.
Certainly.
And then on the other hand, being involved in artificial intelligence projects and running, not just in artificial intelligence, but also in artificial life as well. Running hundreds, thousands of simulations. I understand it's probably not the same as building ChatGPT or something like that, but I think there is still an environmental cost, as you said, associated with this, right? There is a carbon footprint. And so it made me feel, and it still makes me feel, a little bit like a hypocrite. And I guess I'm not pretending to have any answers. This is just sort of me airing some of my own grievances. The one thing that I've tried to do is I recognize the trajectory that AI has gone in and, the increase in computational cost. And just with one mind of looking at artificial life and saying, okay, comparatively speaking, we are still in early days. We're not contributing nearly as much to the detriment of the planet as probably many of the things are right now. But, probably AI-lifers, people working in even computational biology or those types of fields who are running thousands and thousands of simulations, there is a cost associated with this. And if we're trying to solve societal problems, let's, in the process, not try to make it worse.
Yes, it's an interesting. I mean, I think certainly the point that I made back to Gerald, going back to the discussion, was that if Apple and Intel can make better processors out of running my simulations and making them hot for a period of time, then the net effect of this work has been something that is productive and something that's useful and something that's ultimately reducing these things. I think when I look at data centers in particular, my professional history with streaming, my perspective is I could see, and because I've literally been in meetings with, folks that are optimizing, 50% of the internet use associated with streaming. So you have this a sense of that there are other aspects of things in your life that you come in contact with, but the net positives that I've tried to have is to have, an effect on, multi-core processors and various other things. I think it's a very interesting slope because it kind of forces you into industry in a way that you need to be perfectly wanting to be. And I think contemporary academic A-life has this strange relationship with industry, which means that I think they need to make it, full feet in, so to speak, with regards to their role and relationship and ethical responsibility with industry, which ultimately changes the field as well. That's a discussion that needs to be had on many different levels here. So I think this is a fascinating topic. It's obviously one that I've thought about, obviously one that you've thought about. I'm sure it's something our listeners have thought about as well. But if we could return to it, because I think it certainly offers a number. Any final words with regards to this topic before we move on?
No, I mean, like I said, I don't want to sound like I am sort of like judging everybody. I mean, I'm guilty of all these things as well. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, there are some things I have. There are some websites like you can estimate the computational cost and the carbon footprint that you have. Running a script might cost. And I don't know, maybe like adding that to papers, or maybe finding more green or energy efficient ways to run simulations. I've ordered some small solar panels that I'm going to try and experiment with and see how long it might take to train some models using those things. But I don't know. I think going forward, maybe in the future, just like AI is having, or maybe we can actually borrow from AI, probably like a set of guidelines or like a framework that just keeps us accountable. And like you said, making sure that we do in some way our work is a net benefit or a net positive, and that we're not making things worse in the process of doing our research, I think is what I'd like.
Yes, and the fact that it ends up in almost all cases in paper products that have to be shipped internationally. And let's just move this topic aside. There are many, many layers to this thing. This comes to the part of the podcast where I get to talk about some of the work that I'm doing currently. And the first thing that we've been discussing with regards to, you call them Gen Zers, I'm forced to call them Gen Zers. But I am working now as the CTO of a startup that is creating college in the US, but hopefully university externally to the US, social networking. And this is one of the most interesting projects that I've worked on recently and had the opportunity to work on. The history behind how I became the CTO was that I did a 3-hour-long video invigilated programming exam, and then did a 2-hour discussion with the CEO of the company. I was able to convey in those 5 hours worth of interaction that technically and socially, I was someone who was interesting and should be in the space. So the company is called Meetster. We're aiming for Y Combinator funding. We're aiming for a variety of things. We've got a really exciting chief architect who's 18. and just an immense amount of energy with regards to the social media space and turning it on its head, basically. Using it for things, very simple simulation things like dating and, the kinds of things that university students or college students, as they're called here, just have completely failed. I mean, literally Discord has been used by universities here as the attempt to do social media. So in contrast to Discord and many other very curious attempts, I'm working on Beatster. With regards to my A-Life development, that was a Freudian slip in of itself. I'm still simulating London in 1940. Still some interesting stuff coming out of that. Apple, ironically, broke a bunch of the graphics stuff that I've written because I use my own graphics as a means of addressing the multi-changing, multi-layered metal et al. Anti-OpenGL infrastructure that Apple has done. So some of the stuff in London 1940 has moved back to libraries. Some of it is still very much real-time interactive, but that's still a project that's ongoing. I have a project called Werewolf, which is in some regards satirizing contemporary solutions, particularly generative AI solutions to programming, because generative AI programming solutions are very curious and very interesting, and perhaps something that might be worthy of a topic of a future Biota podcast. But I'm doing that in kind of contrast to the generative AI solution. And actually, so Ruby, Python, Java, JavaScript, all coming from my low-level C. So the aim is to get Ape SDK to run on those languages, but also actually get some insight with regards to a wide variety of things that, move into the ML space, associated with how to get large blocks of code that has to run in a particular fashion. I reflect on a brief discussion that we had where you said you're not using Rust, you're using Python. I reflect very heavily on that when I think about your work, Imy, it's very curious that Python is the language that has come out of all of this. But anyway.
Oh, really? Why?
I just think it's one of the most inefficient and slow and just really curious languages that has come up. And because there were a few applications in certain areas, that it's moved in a direction that I don't think the original language was ever intended to be used for. But kind of mass adoption and mass use makes this thing a paradigm. Certainly, my background is primarily in C. It's the way I still think for a lot of stuff. And while Python can get exact integer results, taking, 50 to 100 times, I satirize this. We probably should also talk about YouTube somewhere in this thing, because I've moved almost all of my focus, where historically it's been in podcasts, into YouTube recently, which is worthy of talking about as well. Just because the people that follow me, I found this, I posted last night actually on YouTube a video about the stuff that I'm reading currently in TensorFlow. And within about literally a minute and a half, my Facebook Messenger was lighting up with people that had seen the video and wanted to get in contact with me as quickly as possible, associated with my particular perspective with regards to TensorFlow. And that was a very curious kind of feedback loop to get this idea that I'll put a podcast online and I'll, maybe in 4 weeks, sometimes even in a year, I'll get like one email saying, why are you studying football hooliganism as simulated violence in the UK? And I'm like, well, because there's actually a lot of work on football hooliganism associated with simulated violence in the UK. So, that's the expectancy of a podcast. You put something on YouTube and if you're doing it right, within literally hours, you get an immediate feedback loop based on that. So I'm moving a lot of my stuff out of audio podcasting, where I've been historically perhaps in a rut, perhaps associated with Apple's podcasting algorithms and all the other things that make podcasts just such a bespoke thing, into YouTube. What other things do I have to talk about? So the TensorFlow work is returning to work that I've done on a package called LibDeep, now LibDeep 2, which was Bob Mottram's work. Bob has appeared on previous podcasts. He's a researcher, literally this guy had a self-driving car a decade ago, driving over the Yorkshire countryside. So, Bob Mottram is just, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most brilliant minds I've had the opportunity to interact with. His distillation of libdeep as this is exactly the right amount of deep learning that I want to have executable on a wide variety of things that will historically run C. I mean, completely different than the trajectory of TensorFlow and where these other things have gone. But I feel very passionately about maintaining Bob's work specifically about optimization and just as use of memory. I can see ways of improving that and getting various speed out. So shout out to Bob Mottram, maintaining libdeep2 and TensorFlow with the aim to get it actually working on London 1940. There's a problem with regards to buildings that visually it's very easy to look at a building and think that's a proper building. It's got doors, hallway, people can walk internally. And then you have these maps of London, which don't have any of the internal structures of the buildings. So, that as an ML problem has been something that has interested me for at least 2 years now, and worthy of exploring. So we have down here as kind of probably end topics, I'm thinking, how to find the state of art in A-Life development currently. Let's throw that one out as the final topic, and then I'll wax lyrically about 28 years of doing open source A-Life development at the very end.
Yeah, okay. So let's have a look. How to find the state of the art? Whoa, I mean, this is a really good question because this goes back to what I said earlier about A-Life having a marketing problem.
Without question. I mean, just the fact that I moved my stuff to YouTube indicates that, the benefit analysis should have been done very early on with A-Life with regards to these means. But yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I know that there is one A-Lifer. I think she is at Michigan State. I might have got that wrong. Emily Dawson. She has created the A-Life. It's not a Wikipedia. Maybe it's a Wikipedia.
It's a Wikipedia. It's a wiki. Yeah. No, I've interacted with the. Yes.
Yeah. And then, I mean, that's the goal. There would be, I guess, to aggregate, as much as possible and as quickly as possible, updated content and try to keep the state of the art in artificial life there. So, you have a repository almost and a good resource of everything that's happening or everything that might have ever happened. It's
incredibly ambitious. I mean, it's incredibly ambitious. And certainly my interaction was, I think it took about 6 months and ended up with one of the longest running YouTube videos of my simulation work, just indicating it was stable. And I think, it was a very interesting experience because in contrast to what used to be there with Wikipedia, no longer is there with Wikipedia. I mean, it really is interesting about where you actually find it. But I would agree with you that just the fact that the, alife.org wiki page is functioning is probably a good starting point for people. Outside, I would say, I've not utilized TikTok for this, but I certainly find on YouTube frequently discovering. And the thing that I find fascinating, which is somewhat frustrating but also fascinating, is the breadth of body of this work isn't ever appreciated by the people starting out in it. So you have people who are like, I've created a new cellular automata algorithm that uses floating point numbers, and you're just like, okay, where does one begin with this? I used to think my duty as being editor of Biota was actually to contact journalists when they'd actually publish in mainstream publications, things like this, because oftentimes, bless these people, but they, you've created the simulation, you've done it in a vacuum, you're not aware of any of the prior work of the simulation, you put it up on YouTube, you immediately get, millions of hits, none of whom of any of these people have any idea of the history. So you have this view of history, which is very new, unique, not in any way jaded or related to the actual academic study associated with this thing. So, yeah. Anyway, I've completely derailed the conversation once again. How do you want to conclude this thing?
I just had a thought. What was I going to say? Well, one thing that I do find interesting, and again, I will make reference back to artificial intelligence, but when we do, and I don't want to sort of like juxtapose the two fields, but when we look at AI and you see the amount of work that's being done in AI, I think there's there's one new paper on archive every 10 minutes on AI, which is
I would imagine
technically faster. Like you can't keep up with the reading. Physically couldn't keep up with the reading of the amount of papers. But yeah, what we find in amongst all of that is the state of the art still, like the community and the developers and the researchers still sort of converge on what would be the state of the art, and I find that quite fascinating, right? So you might have thousands of papers and thousands of even hundreds of models that come out every year, and everybody converges on a dozen.
Yes.
Like, how does that happen? And I find that fascinating, and I think if we can figure that out, then maybe A Life can maybe borrow something from there.
I don't know. I reflect on the fact that the one paper that everyone reads and references was associated with Bruce Damer's work, and he created Bota, but Bota no longer exists in the original view of his creation. So my perspective with regards to papers is just that they're kind of interesting and ethereal. I will use the last few seconds associated with this recording to say that I've been working in this field open source for 28 years now. And this month that we're entering into, June 13th, will be the 28th year that I've done this thing. And having done it for that long, and reaching back to Margaret A. Bowden's, book, which was published in 1996, which was the year I started developing my simulation, just the history, the elements, the people, the whole thing. I'm not really even that old, although I am a bit old. But my view is that this whole thing has been just absolutely fascinating. And in large part, it's thanks to the listeners to this podcast who continue to inspire me and interest me. And just, I can't work out how people found this podcast and started listening. This podcast has been here for about 20 years now. So It's really, we're talking about a resource and people that have subscribed to it and unsubscribed. And, I think the barometer that people just like hearing, A-Life people talk about occasionally A-Life, and occasionally, as we did in our last discussion, or maybe a discussion before that, role-playing games and various other things. I think just the sense that, we are out there actually doing this stuff, and this podcast and, our open source work and all these things represent just an ability for people to touch back on that. So I think that's probably the thing that I get out of 28 years. And 20 years of podcasting and all this other stuff is just that there is benefit in what we say, even though it may not be part of a general history. It may not be part of a history other than, what we keep in our heads, so to speak. But, it's been an amazing luxury to reach out to people, to just move air particles close to me and have these air particles resonate in England, in, Japan, all over the world, Germany, just a wide variety of places that even in far-flung places like Australia. It's just been an amazing privilege more than anything. And I always have to think of it as a privilege, as a luxury, as something that I've just been able to do thanks to folks such as yourself, Imy, that have been wanting to carry on the conversation. So anyway, that's my spiel.
Well, congratulations on 28 years of development. I think that's incredible. I think, like I said, the last episode of the episode before, I think the motivation to just carry it on by itself, it's inspirational. I don't know if I could ever undertake something for that long. So I think I certainly look to you, and I certainly look to your Git commits and use that as inspiration every now and then to be like, okay, I can carry on something.
Well, it's moved in a variety of different directions. I mean, what I will say about the past 28 years is certainly if you look at what is now called the Ape SDK, there are occasional Git commits, but if you look at things like Werewolf, if you look at things like, certainly the Meatster stuff, which unfortunately is not public, my hope is to move some of that into open source as much as possible, but certainly just on, Werewolf alone, just the directions that the simulation's taking, the London 1940 stuff, there's always some human effort behind it. And as it is currently, it's just reading O'Reilly books to get what the current state of the art is with regards to, you put your eyes down for what seems like minutes, decades go past with regards to specifically AI research, as you've noted. But anyway, Imy, it's been an absolute pleasure. We can't allow this to, I don't know, a year plus since the last one. We've got to make these things as more frequent. And my hope is that the listeners will also give us feedback associated with just continuing these things with a slightly better frequency.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom, for having me on, and looking forward to speaking again soon.
Definitely. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.